This is Diana Sullivan in Austin, Texas. I want to show one more shoulder attachment method, and this is something that I very often do. Now, I showed you the loop through a loop method last time, and I have found with a lot of my garments that if I'm just a little bit careful and make swatches so that I understand what tension will be necessary, that I can do this other shoulder join and generally be very happy with it. Now, I think another method that bears mentioning, I did a lesson on Kitchener stitch, is to do Kitchener stitch and then use sewing thread and put a binding tape underneath to reinforce it. So that's another method you could do. There are always a lot of ways to do things. Now, this one, I'm hanging the first shoulder on just like I did in the last one. This time though, I'm not going to pull the stitches of one shoulder through the stitches of the other shoulder. I'm just going to bind them off together, and then I'll show that to you and you can see with that how that results. Let's see what I have here on this end. There we go, I'll get that last loop. And I like to remove the waist yarn at this point. And as I remove the waist yarn, I can look and see if I've done a good job hanging these on the needles. Now here's the second one, and I'll just put it on. One of the things that people do sometimes is they plan their shoulders ahead so that when they get to the stitch that's bumpy where they did the short rowing, it doesn't fall on the same needle. Now, this shoulder that I am putting on was not planned that way, and you can see that on the stitch where I did the short rowing, this stitch and this stitch, it's very bumpy indeed. One of the things you can do to help smooth that out is to use the method where, rather than doing wraps, because you see these were done with wraps, rather than doing 4 stitches and then knit 2 rows and wrap on the off row, you could do this with the 1 stitch and then the 3, the 1 stitch and then the 3. Another thing you could do to plan it so that the bumps aren't all together is you could just do a couple of stitches at the beginning before you do any shaping, any other shaping, just to throw the count off a little bit. Now, what I do on this one to ensure that everything knits off okay is I just bring all of these to E position, and I don't use my very loosest tension. Now, I would experiment with this ahead of time and get the tension I want. I'm going to knit across and do my quick little latch tool bind off, and this gives us another shoulder join that's reinforced, that won't get all saggy on us after it carries the weight of a sleeve. Now, I would say that if it's a sleeveless sweater or vest, I'm just going to Kitchener it, because I like the way Kitchener looks. I like a good invisible join. This is just necessary sometimes because you need the reinforcement. Now, I would like to remark that you can put almost any seam together on the knitting machine by hanging the 2 sides the way I just did and then binding off. The thing that you have to experiment with, if you're doing sides where you pick up bumps and loops instead of picking up these open stitches, you have to experiment to get the right number of spots picked up. Typically, you're going to want to pick up 3 stitches and skip the 4th row. Okay, so here's my shoulder. Get this guys out of the way a little bit. I need to unravel the waist yarn so that it can be seen. And this is how this particular shoulder join looks. So this is the second shoulder join, and I believe I have the first shoulder join here. You can see, in my opinion, the second shoulder join that I did looks a little bit better. It looks a little bit smoother and less lumpy. And by experimenting with the tension, I can get this very sturdily reinforced. This little chain stitch only stretches so much, and after that it won't move anymore. So that's how you can join shoulders on the knitting machine.